Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, if we allow this, it's all over. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this need to trample on our rights, violate our rights, the rights to privacy, the rights to illegal search and seizure, violating our freedom of speech through censorship, and the use of technology by governments all around the world to just take away our rights, surveil us illegally, and look after people, the big brother that George Orwell warned about. And this is what we're up against right here. So this article, it's from the Activist Post. This was written by Jonathan Turley. He's a Democrat in the United States, a liberal lawyer, but an old school liberal who actually believes in freedom of speech. And this is what he has to say. The title of this one is, "We Are Restricting Freedom for the Common Good. Irish Green Party Calls for Limiting Free Speech." And guys, notice what they say there, for the common good. How many times have governments stated for the common good, especially in the 20th century? How many authoritarian governments said, we're doing this for the common good, for the collective? And just like any government program, it's the opposite of what it says. It was not for the common good. It does harm to the people, to you and me. So let's read what this article says. It says, the Irish Green Party followed many on the left around the world, including our own Democrat Party this week, and came out for censorship and speech controls. Indeed, the party went full Orwellian as its chairwoman, Pauline O'Reilly, called for restricting freedom in order to protect it. O'Reilly's comments are part of the indoctrination, O'Reilly's comments, you can tell where my mind is, are part of the introduction of the Criminal Justice, Incitement to Violence or Hatred and Hate Offenses Bill 2022. The legislation would criminalize incitement to violence or hatred against people with protected characteristics, as well as condoning, denying, or grossly trivializing genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against peace. Most people would say, well, what's wrong with that? But here he states, limiting free speech has become an article of faith for many on the left. I, this is Jonathan Turley speaking, says, have written about my distress as someone who grew up in a liberal, politically active Democrat family in Chicago and watching the abandonment of free speech values by the party. And let me tell you, I've seen this firsthand. I went to college in the mid to late 1990s. Back then, pretty much every college campus you went on, it was universally accepted that freedom of speech should be protected at all costs, that if we limit someone else's ability to speak freely, well, then ours could be limited as well. And it didn't matter pretty much where you fell on the political spectrum. That was a concrete belief held by Americans of any political background. But today, you go on a college campus, and if you give speech that they don't like, which is generally conservative speech, Christian speech, any speech that doesn't go along with the leftist narrative, not only they won't just disagree with you, they will try to run you out or incite violence against you. So free speech is dead on college campuses across America, and free speech is dying in Western cultures all across the world, as we read about in this article. So he goes on, he says, the anti-free speech movement has become openly Orwellian in claiming to protect freedom by limiting freedom. It also employs using terms like disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation to obscure their effort to silence those with opposing views. And we see that on social media. You'll get these tags. I'll probably get a tag on this video for putting it out. What do those terms mean? Well, they mean anything that goes against the leftist narrative that's been put in place. He says rather than use censorship, they refer to to content moderation. And guys, that is intentional. They're intentionally changing words, changing the vocabulary. When they shift that political discourse, it's to water down and make people overlook what they're really doing. Well, it's not censorship, it's content moderation. That sounds much more palatable to the general public. And we've seen this for years. When I was growing up, if you were someone who entered the country illegally and you weren't supposed to be here, you were a citizen of another nation and you didn't enter the country lawfully, you were called an illegal alien. But then they changed that term to, well, illegal immigrant. And everybody in the press started using this term, illegal immigrant, illegal immigrant. And the reason they did that is because most people had a family history. They came to America via immigration. And so immigrants were held in a positive light. So how could you, if you were against illegal immigration, well, then you must be against immigrants. But you're not against immigrants because immigration implies legal entry into the country, not illegal entry. So they switched from illegal alien to illegal immigrant. And then they switched again to, well, now you're an undocumented worker, right? Because that sounds even better. Well, these are hardworking people. They just don't have the proper documents, right? They're not illegal aliens, they're undocumented workers. And so this is how this works. Guys, you can't allow the vocabulary to be changed. This is how they help institute, they help shift the political spectrum. They help shift the political discourse away from what's really happening to what sounds, well, moderate, like content moderation, right? But that's not what's going on. It's censorship. So we need to use the words that mean what they mean. So this goes on. He says, speaking before the Irish Senate this week, Green Party chairwoman Pauline O'Reilly declared, when one thinks about it, all law and all legislation is about the restriction of freedom. This is exactly what we are doing here. We are restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good, right? And I would argue with a whole lot that she has to say about that. But what exactly does she mean? Well, she goes on and she tells us, if we scroll down a little bit, she says, if a person's views on other people's identities make their lives unsafe and insecure, and cause them such deep discomfort that they cannot live in peace. And of course, this is all subjective. How do you prove any of this? Our job as legislators is to restrict those freedoms for the common good. So, guys, this is what we're dealing with now. It says, what is interesting is that O'Reilly admits that there's nothing new about hateful views, but it is time to clear out such voices. She says, social media has fueled hatred, but it has also put on display for all of us the dirty, filthy underbelly of hatred in Irish society. That hatred has always existed, and I would say, well, if it's always existed, yet people have lived in relative freedom, what is the problem? And I'll tell you what the problem is. The problem is that social media has destroyed the corporate media monopoly, where people can speak directly to each other and they have freedom. And we can't have that. We can't have true freedom of speech, because then their incorrect ideas would have to stand up to scrutiny in the public square. And they can't do that. They can't handle freedom of speech. They can't handle the free exchange of ideas because their ideas fail in the marketplace of ideas. He says, of course, she and the majority will determine what views create deep discomfort. And that's exactly right. They're going to determine whether or not your speech should be protected or not. And if it disagrees with them, well, then it won't be protected. He says the Irish legislation is likely to be replicated around the world if the free speech community cannot hold the line against the anti-free speech movement. It is part of an unrelenting movement in Europe, particularly by the European Union, to roll back Western free speech values that once defined countries. And guys, no doubt this is a global movement, particularly in Western countries, to stamp out freedom of speech institute censorship in the name of content moderation, and to destroy social media because, again, their policies cannot stand up to scrutiny in the public square. And so we're seeing this not just in Ireland, we're seeing this everywhere, as evidenced right here in this Zero Hedge article. It says CISA tried to cover up domestic censorship and big tech collusion, according to a House report. So this here is in the United States. It says a federal government agency set up to protect cybersecurity and critical infrastructure tried to cover up its domestic censorship practices, according to an interim report released by the House Committee on the Judiciary and the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. It says the report released on Monday sheds light on the concerning nexus among Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and big tech companies and government-funded third parties. CISA is a little-known agency within the Department of Homeland Security. Previously undisclosed non-public documents have revealed that CISA acted beyond its power to surveil speech on social media and colluded with big tech companies like Twitter and government-funded third parties to censor by proxy. Messages presented in the report show that CISA then tried to conceal its plainly unconstitutional activities from the public. So we know they've been doing this. They did this during the pandemic. We've seen on YouTube in the past where certain things can't be spoken on Facebook, on Twitter prior to the Elon Musk acquisition, where if you said the wrong thing, you were banned. You were cut off from the public square. Guys, this would be no different than the old days if the telephone company decided, well, you have political speech and views that we don't like, so we're going to cut off your telephone service. People would have been outraged, but for some reason, they look the other way when social media companies try to do this. This article goes on. It says, the report accuses CISA of trying to circumvent the First Amendment by using government-funded third parties to collude with big tech companies to suppress certain viewpoints. CISA is not a law enforcement agency and is not authorized to act as an intelligence agency, but in practice, that is how CISA has behaved, arrogating to itself the authority to conduct surveillance of Americans on social media, the report states. CISA expanded its unconstitutional practice by developing an elaborate social media censorship apparatus spanning multiple organizations in order to facilitate the censorship of Americans' political speech, both directly and by proxy. The report highlights particularly concerning practices such as CISA's contemplation of establishing a, quote, rapid response anti-misinformation team, relocating censorship operations to a third-party nonprofit to avoid negative perceptions, and the agency's intention to employ the nonprofit as a mouthpiece to evade accusations of government propaganda. So have no doubt about it, guys. This wasn't an accident where a government bureaucracy got a little bit out of control, forgot where their lanes were, what the boundaries were, and they got carried away. No, they knew what they were doing was unconstitutional, and they tried to cover it up. They tried to use these third-party, government-funded corporations as basically shell companies and said, oh, well, this is a nonprofit that's just trying to issue content moderation, right? But it was really the government censoring the free speech of its citizens. So no doubt about it, guys, there are people who want to suppress free speech. We all know it. We all see it. We need to be standing up against this. We need to be standing for righteousness. So in the United States, they're trying to cover that up and act like it's not happening. Well, in other places like France, they aren't even trying to cover it up, as we see in this article. It says France passes bill to allow police to remotely activate your phone camera and microphone and spy on people. It says a bill that would allow police in France to spy on suspects by remotely activating cameras and microphones, including GPS on their phones, has been passed. The bill allows the geolocation of crime suspects, covering other devices like laptops, cars, and connected devices, just as it could be remotely activated to record sound and images of people suspected of terror offenses. No, suspected of, right? Not engaged in, but suspected of. And of course, in the United States, we know that who do they suspect? Well, you, right? Me. As well as delinquency and organized crime. And we go on and we read, well, the lawmakers agreed to the bill late Wednesday as the Justice Minister insisted the bill would only affect a dozen cases a year. So it's okay. It's only a dozen cases a year. And how many times have we heard that where they start out this process, they put a new law out there, they put legislation out there and say, don't worry about it. It's not going to be used on you. It's just for these handful of cases and they're all engaged in this crime, right? And then you find out later, oh no, we were using it to fail everybody and that was the plan from the beginning. And if you have any doubt about that, let's read down, because remember, they always bury the lead near the bottom of the story. So this is my favorite line from this article that it says, they said sensitive professions, including doctors, journalists, lawyers, judges, and MPs, they would not be legitimate targets, right? So the elite of society, the people that we deem as, well, they're the good guys, we aren't going to use this on them. And you think, well, if you're not going to use it on them, who's it for? Well, you, right? So it's to be used on you and it's to be used on me. We're the criminals that they're talking about. And we started off with Jonathan Turley talking about this Orwellian attack on free speech. Well, a lot of people, when they think of George Orwell, they think of 1984. They often forget Animal Farm, which this reminds me of. If you remember, in Animal Farm, well, some animals are more equal than other animals, right? And in this case, the elites of society, well, the MPs, the judges, the lawyers, the journalists, the doctors, lawyers, all of our friends, other people that we deem our friends, people who are leftists, people that agree with us, well, this won't be used on them because they're more equal. But you and me, well, we are less equal. Guys, this is where we are headed. This is the scary part isn't necessarily the technologies that they're using, but the attitudes that we see from so many people who are willing to take hold of this authority and wield it over their fellow citizens. And that's what we need to be standing up against. We need to say, no, you can't do that. We have rights, God-given rights that you can't take away. But unfortunately, I'm afraid this is where we're going to go, because I believe we live in the generation that will see the fulfillment of the prophecies written about in the Bible for the end times, much like this one right here from Revelation chapter 13, verse 7. It says, and the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. And I want you to think about that for a moment, because oftentimes people who read that, they know what the Bible says, but think about what it would take to rule the entire earth. I mean, we've seen empires in the past that have grown massive, that have governed large percentages of the world's population. But as they grew, they became more bureaucratic, they became unwieldy, they fell apart, they had rebellions, and they eventually collapsed. What the Bible tells us is that there will be one empire in the last days that is able to maintain control over the entire earth. What would it take to do that? Well, we see this technology coming into place today where many of us, myself included, are walking around with mobile phones that are being used against us. They're being used to record us, listen to us, track us. They use social media accounts to build a profile of everything about us. In some cases, they know more about ourselves than we do. And so that's the world we're in now. And we're moving into a world that's going to be even more surveillance oriented when you think about all of this talk of rolling out central bank digital currencies, where they'll be able to track everything you buy and sell, every financial transaction. We'll have a cashless society. There will be no way to function outside of the system. This is all setting up the mark of the beast system. And so they'll set the system in place. Again, the mark of the beast won't come until the midpoint of the tribulation. But it's not just going to appear out of nowhere. It has to be set up. The infrastructure has to be put in place ahead of time. And we're seeing that. We're seeing companies like Audi that we talked about just a few weeks ago, where you can't even enter some of their stores unless you download their app first. And they know everything about you as you enter the store. We see this in some of the Amazon to-go stores where you scan your palm print in order to pay. We see it everywhere with cameras with facial recognition. They can track everywhere you go in a store, everywhere you go outside of the store, all the public streets. We see doorbell cameras now all throughout the neighborhood. So the government can track you in your home, as you leave your home, as you go to somewhere in the community, as you enter a store. They can track your whereabouts 24 hours a day. And soon they'll have the power to be able to simply cut you off. And you know they're developing these social credit scores that are going to go hand in hand with that ability. And the central bank digital currencies they're talking about, of course, will be programmable. So in some cases they claim, in some of the cases they're claiming, well, they won't be, right? And your European Union, Christine Lagarde is saying, oh, we promise this won't be. And it may be true when they initially roll it out, right? They'll roll it out and they'll say, see, this was overblown. This isn't programmable. Then we'll get rid of all the cash. Oh, now that you're in the system, now it is programmable. And we see here that you posted on social media something that we don't like. So not only has that been censored in your account, put into a moratorium, but you can't spend any of your central bank digital currency outside of a 1 mile radius for the next 30 days. And if you get a second strike or a third strike, well, if you get a third strike, you're cut off altogether. You can't even have an account. Just as we talked about previously with Nigel Farage. He can't even open a bank account in the UK. He's been cut off. He's been blacklisted. And they're going to be doing this to more and more people. This is how they suppress political dissent and set up tyranny on a global scale. We also talked about technologies in the future where they're able to roll out nanodust, the smart dust that's everywhere, with trillions and trillions of cameras and microphones the size of dust particles that are plentiful, that are everywhere, feeding all of this information into their artificial intelligence and sifting through that data, looking for certain patterns, finding out who's going to be a political dissident, maybe even before they know they're going to be. And then they'll come pick you up. Guys, this is how this global tyranny is going to come into place. We're seeing all of it laid out right before us. And I know that this sounds like bad news, and it is, no doubt about it. All of this is evil. It is definitely demonically inspired evil. But guys, the good news is all of this points to the soon return of Jesus Christ. Jesus is coming back, guys. And he said to look for certain things. He said, when you see these things begin to happen, look up. Your salvation draws near. I'm right at the door. And the things he said to look for, we're seeing those things begin to happen. No other generation can point to those things the way ours can. Centuries and centuries of Christianity, Christian history, not one of these signs was present, but today we see them. We see the Jewish people back in the land of Israel, the Jewish nation once again back in the land. We see Jewish control of the city of Jerusalem. We see the Gog of Magog alliance coming together. We see the gospel being preached to all the nations of the world. We see this drive toward global government. We see the technology put in place for this mark of the beast system, for all of the things that we read about in Revelation that required, for previous generations, they required a supernatural method in order to be fulfilled, but that's no longer the case with technology. We read in Revelation 11 that the whole world will look upon the bodies of the two witnesses as they lie dead, and the whole world will watch as they are resurrected. How is that possible for the whole world to do that in previous generations? But today, we can see how that can happen. Even in the poorest countries in the world, people have mobile devices. And we're seeing more and more people come online on those mobile devices with each passing day. We're seeing high speed, high definition video being sent to those devices. So guys, we are, I believe, the generation that is witnessing the things Jesus said that we would witness, the things that Jesus talked about, the things that the prophets talked about when they said the end times would be upon us. And when the disciples asked Jesus, what will be the sign of your coming and the establishment of your kingdom, meaning at the end of the tribulation and all the prophecies of the tribulation period, we're seeing the world stage set today for the fulfillment of those prophecies, which means that the rapture of the church is even closer than the fulfillment of those prophecies. All it means, guys, is Jesus is coming back. So you need to be living your life today with that in mind. That needs to be your central focus. Jesus could come back at any moment. And so as Peter says, what righteous lives you should be living, what holy lives you should be living, focused on God, focused on his word and prayer and fellowship, standing for righteousness and telling others the good news of Jesus Christ, that while we were still sinners, Jesus went to the cross and died for us. He died for our sins so that we could have life and be with God for all of eternity. Guys, there's no better news on earth than that. There's nothing you can do in your life that is more important than knowing Jesus Christ. So I pray if you don't know him, that you will invite him into your life today. So what do you think about all of this? Let me know what you think. What other things are you seeing? How else are they surveilling us? What other ways are we walking into this trap that it's not long until it's over? There's no escape from these traps that have been laid for us. So leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Friday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.